Let me introduce Dr. Abdul Gafusa. He's working in Apollo Hospital, Chennai, and he's the primary author and the coordinator of Chennai Declaration, a document and initiative by medical societies in India to tackle the challenge of antimicrobial resistance from the Indian perspective. He is also a consultant and adjunct professor in infectious diseases at the Apollo Hospitals, Chennai, India. He is a technical advisory committee member for National Policy of Indian Ministry of Health. And Dr. Abdul Ghafoor is an advisory and jury member of the Longitude Prize. He had the honor to be interviewed by British Medical Journal for the BMJ Confidential as recognition of the work in antibiotic policy field. He has delivered lectures in numerous prestigious international infectious diseases and antibiotic policy conferences around the world and has been published in well-reputed journals such as BMJ, Lancet, etc. He is an editorial board member and reviewer of many international journals. He received Indian Medical Association Oration Award for his contribution towards tackling antibiotic resistance efforts. Okay, sir, over to you. Let us hear from you. The most important topic, the COVID, the most important concern of all of us, the COVID, the vaccines are coming, many concerns are arising. All of you, please listen to him and you can arise the questions and you can put your queries in the chat box and we will discuss it after the session. Okay, over to Dr. Abdul Ghafoor. Welcome, sir.
Any kind of foreign invaders entering our body. Interferons play a significant role in the innate immunity, especially against the virus. Now, the innate immunity is non-specific, but it's very fast. The moment the virus enters our body, for example, COVID virus, respiratory tract, within minutes, the innate immunity kicks in and tries to control the virus. Now, but unfortunately, the COVID virus has special mechanism that can evade the innate immunity. They can delay the formation of the interferons and other protective mechanisms. The innate immunity cannot help contain the virus. The adaptive immunity kicks in. For example, the viral fragments from the respiratory tract will be carried by the messenger cells to the surrounding nearby lymph nodes. And lymph nodes, we have got the T cells, CD4 cells and CD8 cells waiting to receive these viral fragments. And then the CD4 and CD8 cells multiply. The CD4 cells help the B cells to produce antibodies, and the T cells kill the viral fragments directly. The T cells are the CD8, the killer T cells are responsible for killing intracellular virus. They're the killer T cells. The CD4 or the helper T cells, they help the B cells to produce antibodies against the virus. So the killer T cells kill the intracellular virus, where the CD4 cells help the B cells to produce antibodies, and antibodies prevent the entry of the virus into the cell. That is the adaptive immunity. Now, the virus is escaping the innate immunity, and usually the adaptive immunity is able to clear the virus. If these two mechanisms fail, our immune system goes mad. And that's where we develop the cytokine storm, and the storm kills whatever we see around the surrounding, and the virus damages the body, and our own immunity damages the body. So we have got the innate immunity, we have the adaptive immunity, and then the dysregulated immunity harming the body. Coming to the adaptive immunity is slow to develop. The innate immunity develops within few minutes. Adaptive immunity takes hours or even days to develop. For example, antibody, the COVID IgM antibody takes usually 7 days to develop. It starts formation by 5 to 7 days. It peaks 2 to 3 weeks and disappears by 3 months. So start formation by probably 5, 7 up to 10 days, and peak 2 to 3 weeks and disappears by 3rd month. That's IgM. The IgG start developing by 10 days, peak by 2 to 3 weeks, and COVID has an unusual antibody response. The IgM and IgG start formation almost simultaneously. Maybe IgM a bit faster than IgG, but they peaks in a similar way. But IgM disappears by the 3rd month, but IgG level come down by 2nd month, 3rd month, and then it increases. That's unusual. That's a very interesting pattern. Now, if you look at the earlier studies of COVID antibody, you would have read a lot of papers on the waning COVID antibody. It's really waning. Now, if you look at the pattern of IgG, IgM disappears by 3rd month. Yes, IgA always also disappears. IgG comes down after the peak of 2 to 3 weeks. The IgG also comes down, and then after coming down, it is expected to remain stable for some time. That's antibody response to almost all infection. But in the case of COVID, that fall is a bit steep, and some individuals it even disappears completely. But majority of the individuals, it picks up later and then remains stable at a higher titer. Today, we have plenty of publications of stable, robust antibody response, even to 6 to 8 months. That's the best study we can get after the beginning of the pandemic. We have data up to 6 to 8 months of robust and stable antibody response to COVID, IgG. So, why did we read a lot of newspaper articles and journal publications on the waning COVID antibody response? It's called as the intermediate contraction phenomenon. It's expected of all coronaviruses. The antibody after the peak, the fall is steep, very steep, but later it picks up and becomes stable. So what we heard of the waning antibody stories, we are talking about the intermediate contraction phenomenon, and antibody is not disappearing. Antibody is not waning. We have plenty of data of stable, robust antibody response even after 6 to 8 months. Any COVID mild to moderate to severe, the antibody seroconversion is more than 90%. More than 90% of the moderate to severe COVID patients will have antibodies. That's seroconversion. And these individuals, even after 7 months, more than 70% will have robust antibody response. So the majority of the COVID positive individuals will have antibody even after 6 months. That's the data so far. The coming months, we will get data for 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, like that. This is the existing data. So the waning antibody response is only an intermediate contraction phenomenon. Now, some of the mild in patients or asymptomatic patients, the antibody may be undetectable in up to 40%. So even in asymptomatic individuals, even in mildly symptomatic individuals, more than 60% of the individuals will have antibody response. And even these individuals will have stable titer after 6 months. In fact, many of the patients with asymptomatic individuals with absent antibody response earlier may have antibody response later. So overall, COVID has got strong, robust, sustained antibody response even after 6 months. Now that's about the antibody. So how does it function? See, during the peak of IgM and IgG, that peak is by plasma blast. The plasma cells become plasma blast. It is that blast response that is producing the peak of IgM and IgG antibodies, and they contain the virus. Once the virus is contained, we don't need peak response anyway, and the plasma blast die off, antibody titer come down, and then how does IgG persist? IgG persists because many of the plasma cells migrate to the bone marrow. And that's called as long-acting plasma cells in the bone marrow. It is the long-lasting plasma cells in the bone marrow that produce the basal sustained IgG response. Now, this is not memory cells. These are not memory cells. These are the long-lasting plasma cells residing in bone marrow. Now, even patients with asymptomatic, even patients with no antibody will have very robust cell-mediated immunity. We have got plenty of studies. 100% of the patients with severe and moderate COVID have got robust cell-mediated immunity. Even 87% of the mild or asymptomatic COVID patients have robust cell-mediated immunity, robust CD4 cells and CD8 cells immunity. So the COVID elicits robust antibody response, robust B cell response, and robust T cell response, and these are sustained. Now, many of the B cells get transformed into memory T cells. And these memory T cells, even after clearing of the infection, they remain in the body, they circulate in the system, and when a second COVID attack comes, the memory B cells multiply and produce the peak of antibodies again. That's the function of memory T cells. Similarly, the T4, the CD4, and CD8 cells number come down over the time because you don't need them anyway. And few of them remain as memory T CD8 cells and memory CD8 cells, and they multiply when the second COVID attack comes into the picture. So overall, the COVID has got robust antibody and cell-mediated immune response. So it's very important to discuss about the waning antibody titer. Yes, the waning antibody titer was the intermediate contraction phenomenon. That's one reason. And the other reason is the sensitivity of the antibody assays. There are dozens of antibody assays available in the market. Some of them are very sensitive, some of them are not very sensitive. If you use a kit that's not very sensitive, you will get false and negative. For example, the virus, as you know, has got a spike protein. The spike has got a receptor binding domain. The receptor binding domain of the spike is the one that is attaching to the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor of the human cell. So that spike protein, antibodies against spike proteins are very important. These anti-spike antibodies are the ones that helps in producing the neutralization antibody. Antibodies can be developed against other viral components as well. For example, there's a nucleocapsid antigen of the virus. Antibodies develop against nucleocapsid, but that doesn't help the neutralization. The neutralization is the antibody is the one that prevents the entry of the virus into the cell. So, what the antibody that we measure is a total antibody. It's the binding antibody. What we need to important is the neutralization antibody, neutralization assay, but we can't do neutralization assay in routine laboratory. But we should be happy that there is plenty of data, and we know that there is a strong correlation between the neutralization titer and the total antibody. Excellent correlation. More than 90% of the people with antibody have neutralization antibody. You don't need to measure it. It exists in almost most of the people with total antibody. So we don't have to look for neutralization antibody in all the cases in the clinical scenario or surveillance. We check for the total antibody. So there are different kits available. So if you use a kit that is targeting the spike protein, the assay will have higher sensitivity. If you use a kit against the nucleocapsid, it will have a lower sensitivity. So the so-called the serosurveillance and the seroprevalence depends upon the level of infection, the kit that we use. The kit that is targeted against the spike protein is the best kit with higher sensitivity. Now, what's the role of this antibody testing? Can we use antibody testing for diagnosis of COVID? We know for diagnosis of COVID, we use PCR or antigen. Antibody is not the primary modality. But after 2 weeks, a late presentation, the PCR will be negative. So if a patient is coming after 2 weeks of the onset of symptoms, 2 PCRs are negative, you can check antibody, but should be after 2 weeks of the onset of symptoms. You can check for IgG antibody or IgM or IgG and IgM together. Don't check IgM alone. You check for IgG and IgM together or IgG. Because as I explained already, COVID has got unusual phenomenon. The IgG and IgM raise simultaneously. You don't have to check for IgM separately. You can do IgG and IgM together, combined test, but not individually. It's unnecessary and can produce false results. That's about the antibody testing. So we know about the robust antibody and cell-mediated response. We discussed about the antibody testing, antibody assays. The antibody testing has significant role in seroprevalence studies. And we have got plenty of data across the world and in India. Overall, a recent meta-analysis found that 4% of the global population could be seropositive for COVID. That means 600 million people around the world may have antibody against COVID. We know that 60 million people are PCR positive. 60 million. 10 times more could be antibody positive. 600 million. So 4% of general overall global population and 5 to 10% of the high-risk group, like medical community, could be antibody positive. But if you look at the seroprevalence data from many Indian metropolitan cities, 25 to 50% of the population is seropositive. Recent study from Pune, 55% seropositive. Karnataka, 25 to 50%. Delhi, many parts, 50% positive. Overall, 25 to 50% of the many parts of the metropolitan cities in the country are antibody positive. The data from villages may be less common than that of the metropolitan cities. Now, healthcare workers in India. There are plenty of publications of seroprevalence on healthcare workers in India. 10 to 20% of the healthcare workers are positive. And there are sort of unpublished studies where 25 to 40% of the healthcare workers are positive. So overall, 10 to 20% of the healthcare workers, or even up to 1/3 of the healthcare workers, could be positive for antibody. So we have high seroprevalence in our country. It may be different from Western countries where the seroprevalence is low. In India, we know that despite the lockdown, despite whatever we did, the virus was spreading in a subclinical way. That's why we have high seroprevalence in our country. In a way, that seroprevalence helped us in containing the virus outbreak. Because of the high seroprevalence in many of the Indian metropolitan cities, you have very few people left uninfected. In a way, we have reached some kind of herd immunity. I'm not a fan of herd immunity, but we like it or not, it's happening in many of the Indian metropolitan cities. So what exactly is this herd immunity strategy? We know that Sweden is one country who followed a no lockdown strategy. Sweden did not follow herd immunity strategy. They followed the no lockdown strategy. They followed social distancing. They followed hand hygiene. They did not strictly follow masking. They did not lock down. But still, a lot of elderly people died and they did not achieve herd immunity. Sweden did not achieve herd immunity. But anyway, they claimed that herd immunity strategy was not their aim. Their aim was no lockdown to save the economy. Most countries, including India, followed the lockdown strategy. We locked down for several months. That probably helped us in reducing the overall number of cases. But whatever we did, there is a subclinical spread across the country, especially in many metropolitan cities. That's why we have got such a high seroprevalence in many metropolitan cities. The herd immunity is not a safe strategy, in my opinion, but it happens without our knowledge. Indirectly, passively, herd immunity is developing in many Indian metropolitan cities. What about vaccination? Should we vaccinate all? We have 7.5 billion people in the world. 1.3 billion people in India. If we want to vaccinate all, it will take 2 to 3 years to vaccinate all Indians and the global population. And we don't have that much of vaccine now. We can only vaccinate, the Indian government is planning to vaccinate 25 crore Indians by mid next year. 25 crore. That means 50 crore doses, two doses per individual. So 25 crore Indians. That includes 1 crore healthcare workers. We can't vaccinate all. We need to wait. Others need to wait in India and other countries. So should we vaccinate all? We have to vaccinate 70% of the population to get a herd immunity through vaccine. But many of the Indian metropolitan cities and other places have got high seroprevalence. So we may not have to vaccinate 70% of the Indian population. We have got a high seroprevalence in many parts. So vaccine will add up to it. But should we vaccinate antibody positive individuals? We know that all the stories of waning antibody response are false. Antibody response is robust and sustained. But we also know that this antibody response will not last forever. The antibody has to disappear one day. It may be 8 months, it may be 1 year, it may be 2 years. We don't know. It's a new disease. It will disappear one day, and all of us need to get vaccinated one day. But should we all, if I am antibody positive, should I get vaccinated today? I know that there is plenty of that. Now we know that the antibody response is so far sustained and robust. We also know that there are 60 million COVID positive individuals in the world, 45 million recovered, around 40 million are already completely recovered across the world. And how many reinfections are there? Confirmed reinfection? Few dozen. But that is underreporting. Reinfection is only a tip of the iceberg. Now, even if you assume that 500,000 people are reinfected, even then, what is the reinfection rate? 1% maximum. I'm giving the hypothetical scenario of 500,000 reinfection across the world out of the 40 million. Even then, the reinfection rate is 1%. The protection rate is 99%. That is on the ground reality. Now, theory, we know that antibody response is robust and sustained. Cell-mediated response is very good against natural infection. And we also know that recently, 2 weeks ago, the UK NHS published a very good paper. They followed up 11,000 individual healthcare workers who are antibody negative, and 1,200 healthcare workers who are antibody positive. The reinfection rate was, there's a major difference in reinfection rate between antibody positive healthcare workers and antibody negative healthcare workers, with a significant protection amongst the antibody positive individuals. So why should we vaccinate all? Yes, we need to vaccinate all because immunity will not last forever. But we have got deficiency of vaccine. We have got technical issues. We have got strategic issues, logistical issues. We will need 2 to 3 years to vaccinate the global population and all Indians. Why can't we vaccinate antibody negative individuals first and then antibody positive individuals? I never claimed that we don't need to vaccinate antibody positive individuals. We will need to vaccinate antibody positive individuals at a later stage. But now, why can't we give preference to antibody negative individuals? Because they have absolutely no protection. They're vulnerable to disease. While antibody positive individuals have got it's not 100% protection, but significant protection against reinfection. So why can't we vaccinate antibody positive individuals first? I sent a proposal to Health Ministry, sent a proposal to WHO. Health Ministry has at least accepted to look into the proposal. But there is some logistical problem in doing antibody testing to everybody. It's difficult to do antibody testing to everybody before vaccination. But we can do antibody testing in areas where there is high seroprevalence. Wherever there is high seroprevalence places, we can test all and then give vaccine first to antibody negative individuals. Healthcare workers, we can easily do seroprevalence and then give vaccine to antibody negative individuals. Later, when we vaccinate the high-risk antibody negative individuals, we can very well vaccinate antibody positive individuals. That's only a proposal. But I think we should look into proposal for better utilization of our resources. Indian government cannot vaccinate all public. We don't intend to vaccinate the whole public. So why can't we give the vaccine first to antibody negative individuals to protect the highly vulnerable antibody negative individuals? And also, none of the vaccine trials have enrolled antibody positive individuals. So we don't know what will happen if you vaccinate an antibody positive individual. Hopefully, there will be a better immune response. No doubt, there will be a better immune response. But we need data. So until we get that data, until we do trials of vaccinating an antibody positive individual, that will take probably 6 months. Why can't we vaccinate antibody negative individuals first? It's only a thought process for effective utilization of resources, effective utilization of vaccine, and a science-based. In science, we need evidence. If you have to vaccinate antibody positive individuals, the extra immunogenicity and side effect profile, we need data. I'm quite surprised to know that we are planning to vaccinate everybody across the world without knowing their antibody status, when we have such an absolute scarcity of vaccine. Rich countries are hoarding vaccine. Countries like UK and US and rich countries are hoarding vaccine, purchasing all the vaccine while available for their own population, leaving the poor third world countries in trouble, in serious trouble. There is no equitable distribution of vaccine across the world. The rich countries are hoarding the vaccine. They are vaccinating their antibody positive individuals, antibody negative individuals, and there is no equitable distribution of vaccine across the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul Ghaffur. Sir, actually, വളരെ ഡെപ്തിലാണ് സാറ് പറഞ്ഞത്. ഫ്രം ദി ബേസിക് നമ്മൾ പണ്ട് പഠിച്ച കാര്യങ്ങളും കൂടി ഓർമ്മിപ്പിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് ഫിസിയോളജിയും എല്ലാം ഓർമ്മിപ്പിച്ചുകൊണ്ടാണ് സാറ് ശരിക്കും അതിന്റെ ആ actual topic പോയത്. So it was very useful. Now the topic is open for discussion. You can put your queries in the chat box. In the meantime, I will call Dr. Sandhya. Is there?
Yes, ma'am. Hope I am audible now.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to unmute. Yeah, I am audible.
Ma'am, carry on.
Yeah, well, that was a very beautiful session what we had right now. And in India, as Sir has mentioned, there are around 63 million cases and 1.5 million deaths as in the country as of now. And so what I feel is still we are in the pandemic. We are reaching only the end of the tunnel only. Right now, the test positivity rate in Kollam district has also come down. Today it is 7.5, and the number of cases reporting is also coming down. We are doing a maximum number of testing. Like every district is having their own targets. 80,000 is the target of Kerala state. The same goes with the nationally also, because even in China also, when they controlled it, their strategy was test, track and treat for the maximum number of people. So the testing is one of the key important part. But one thing we lack, that is the antibody, the zero surveillance, that we are not doing. Earlier in March or April, we had did some zero surveillance study. But the one important point the sir has mentioned is that the validation of the kit is very important. I don't know what happened to the results of those study. It didn't get published because the results were not uniform across the state. So, as we all know, right now, like many vaccines are in the trial phase. And even in the state, we have taken the data of all the healthcare workers. There are 4 categories. That is what I understood. The 4 categories, and the first priority will be given to the healthcare workers. And as of now, the data of the healthcare workers have already been taken. That including the government as well as the private registered practitioners, including one-man clinic, and then all the Ayush doctors. But what I came to know that the people from the Ayush department, they refused to take the vaccine. So they didn't give their details. And also many of our specialists also are having apprehension whether to take the vaccine or not. So that part is there. Then for any vaccine to be effective, and like we all know, it should give 50%, at least 50% protection to prevent infection and disease, as per the drafts issued by the Central Drugs and Standard Control. So the aim is like 60% herd immunity should be there to break this chain. Even the WHO people are saying that vaccination alone is not enough. You have to still continue with the respiratory hygiene, the cup etiquette, the mask and sanitizer user, plus hand wash and the safe distance keeping. These things we have to continue. Anyway, the threshold of coverage will be percentage of the population that needs to be covered so that the entire population is protected. which in turn will be determined by many factors like the efficacy of the vaccine, then then the rate of spread of infection, that is the infectivity rate, then again the people will have natural immunity or cross immunity. That's what sir mentioned regarding the subclinical infection, that many people are having this subclinical infection. So with these things, the debate is still going on whether you have to give vaccine to a smaller population or you have to give this vaccine to a, then and extrapolate it to the, after the seeing the success of it, you have to try it on a larger population. And so the many debates are being going on, but it is a very good thing that we are in the third and fourth phase of the trials, and we will be moving what in the one of our sessions, what I came to know that we will get the vaccine only by the mid of February, but the news and the press release from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare shows that it is not that far away. So I think with those words we can ma'am, we will open for the discussion. There will be many queries where I just want to know one thing that I have heard in a one recent discussion that like in respiratory viruses usually there will be an antigen shift and antigen drift. This part will be there. So like for human influenza virus, the vaccination, the validity will be only for 1 year. Every year you have to repeat the vaccination. But here, what I came to know that the recently we are having the 614G type. So mostly in the globally, the same virus is circulating, the COVID type. So regarding that, I have a query. Just we will start with that query, and many people must have posted their queries in the chat box. So my question is like so with only one type of virus that is seen globally, do we need to have repeated vaccinations, or that will depend upon the follow-up studies, the phase 4 trials? So
okay, number one, what percentage of the population needs to be vaccinated to reach the herd immunity? There is a disagreement among experts. Some experts believe that we need immunity for 43% of the population to reach the herd immunity. And some experts believe that it's 70%. So it's anywhere between 45 to 70% of the population needs to be immune to reach the herd immunity. Now, many of the Indian metropolitan cities have got high seroprevalence. And then we vaccinate. We are adding to that baseline existing seroprevalence. But if you vaccinate the same individuals who are already antibody positive, we are not adding to the herd immunity. So if you want to utilize the pre-existing seroprevalence as a baseline for the additional protection of the vaccine, we need to vaccinate the individuals who are antibody negative. For example, in one city, 25% is positive. You vaccinate 25% negative, it becomes 50%. So that we can add to the herd immunity. For that, we need to do extensive seroprevalence, antibody testing of the whole high-risk population to even implement this strategy. It's not an easy strategy, but a very sensible strategy. Number two, how long the immunity starts? We don't know. We don't know. We don't know how long the natural immunity starts. We don't know how long the vaccine-induced immunity lasts. Regarding the different strains, see, there are 5 lineages today in the world. 2019, A lineage, B lineage. 2020, A, B, C. So there are 5 lineages. Now, all the 2020 lineages, A, B, C, majority of them are D614G. D614G strain. So, majority of the COVID virus spreading across the world are the D614G, the G strain. That's important because when we started developing the vaccine, we did not use the D614G strain. It was L strain. And does that affect the vaccine efficacy? No. The reason is the D614G mutation, even though it's the spike protein, it's not in the receptor binding domain. It's a spike protein. So even though the strain is different, it's not going to affect the vaccine efficacy. But that said, yeah, I'm sure you heard of the plenty of stories of the Danish, the Ming virus. That where the mutation, the receptor binding domain, and none of the existing vaccines are active against the Ming strain in Denmark. What if that strain spread across the world? All the virus, all the vaccines will fail. Thank God is not spreading across the world. But so far, the existing vaccines will be effective against the common D614G mutation.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think there are some queries in the chat box.
Yes, sir.
One about the
Is there
side effect of vaccine.
Yeah, we have read.
There is
Can
no-
I add
there
one
is-
thing also?
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
today in the newspaper, everybody must have read yesterday, like Haryana minister, after taking the first dose of vaccine, he got this COVID infection. So can you comment on that too?
Okay. The Haryana minister received Covaxin, the Bharat Biotech's Covaxin, and he received only one dose. We need to wait at least 2 weeks after the second dose. So he received only one dose, and actually we don't know he's in the vaccine arm or the placebo arm. There is conflicting stories. Now, even if he's in the vaccine arm, he received one dose. So it's too early for him to have protective antibodies. So, and suppose even if he received an infection even after 2 months of 2 doses, even then that doesn't mean the vaccine is a failure. No vaccine will give 100% protection. And he received one dose anyway, and we don't know if it's a vaccine or a placebo. So I'm not concerned about that at all. Regarding the side effects, there is no medicine in the world without side effects. And all vaccines will have common minor side effects. Moderate side effects are uncommon, but can happen, and rare side effects can happen. That can happen with any medication, including any vaccine. We have to accept that risk. But the risk-benefit ratio of getting a COVID vaccine, the benefit is better than the risk. So I strongly recommend COVID vaccination, but I recommend the strategy of getting the antibody negative first, but WHO hasn't accepted it. No countries have accepted the strategy. I returned to the health ministry, and health ministry has promised we'll look into it, the practicality of such a strategy. Let's see what happens.
So is there any age group in which we have to start with this vaccination, like from the newborn period onwards, when you introduce it into the immunization schedule?
None of the vaccines have included kids in the trial. For example, the Pfizer vaccine is licensed for children about 16 years. So for the time being, children less than 12 years will not receive a vaccine, because no trials have included them. So none of the younger children are going to get the vaccine because none of the trials have included them. We don't know the safety and immunogenicity in kids. So far, I'm sure in future more trials will include children.
What about the antenatals, safety among antenatals?
You mean pregnant mom?
Yeah.
Okay. Currently, trials are not recruiting pregnant ladies, and actually including the currently licensed Pfizer vaccine. Pfizer vaccine has made a very clear distinction. Currently, we cannot vaccinate pregnant ladies. We have to wait. And even if you get a Pfizer vaccine, we have to wait 2 to 3 months before getting pregnant. So far, no. Other vaccines, let's wait and see what the recommendation is going to be. But the one vaccine that is available is the Pfizer vaccine. We can't give it to pregnant ladies.
I think the Pfizer one, we have to store it at -70°, right?
Yeah.
So the storage capacity in India, because even for the immunization, we only have this deep freezer in which limited number of deep freezers in our government setup. Yeah. So how we will manage to store this? Do we have to select a specific point, or what is the strategy? If we are going to introduce that.
So far, we are, to my understanding, we are not going to introduce a Pfizer vaccine as the government list so far, because we don't have a -70 setup in the country. Not in -70, the storage and distribution is very cumbersome for the Pfizer vaccine. It's possible in India, nothing is impossible, but when we have more practical vaccines, why should we look into the Pfizer vaccine? The Moderna vaccine needs only -20, and we do have -20 facility. And the Covaxin, Covishield, Zycode, all the Indian vaccines are vaccines developed in India. They don't need -20 at all. So we have got vaccines that can be stored -2 to 8. Why do we need even think about -70? from a practical perspective, from a government distribution perspective, it will be very cumbersome in India to develop a minus 70 network.
So we do have a question in the chat box. Someone who had adverse effects with other flu vaccine, is it advisable to take COVAX, especially if it is a person completed COVID treatment recently?
Someone who had adverse effects with other flu vaccine, we don't know, because the flu vaccine is developed in the egg and none of the COVID vaccines are developed in the egg. So just having a side effect to flu vaccine doesn't mean the individual is going to have a side effect with the COVID vaccine. But always, and we may not know the exact cause of side effect. By any chance, if you know the real cause of side effect, then we can extrapolate that to the COVID vaccine. But so far, the commonest side effect of the flu vaccine is the egg, the side effects to the egg. But that's not going to be applicable to the COVID vaccine.
Any progress regarding the nasal vaccines?
There are at least two vaccines in the phase 2. One live adenovirus vector vaccine and one DNA vaccine. Let's see. We need nasal vaccine. Whether it is a vector vaccine or a DNA vaccine, we need nasal vaccine, because nasal vaccine will induce better local IgA response, and that will help in better herd immunity. Because for the time being, the vaccine trials are looking into the symptomatic infection. For example, Pfizer vaccine trial has looked into asymptomatic individuals. The Oxford University trial is doing routine PCRs and look into asymptomatic infection, but Pfizer vaccine hasn't looked into asymptomatic infection. So we don't know the impact vaccines will make in the real asymptomatic transmission. But the nasal vaccines will make a significant difference.
Are these vaccines safe to give to the immunocompromised individuals?
Depends on the vaccine. There are vaccines which cannot be given to the immunocompromised. For example, some of the vaccines are live attenuated. So far, none of them are licensed. But there are phase 3 trials on live attenuated COVID virus vaccine. We can't give it to the immunocompromised. The Pfizer vaccine is safe for the immunocompromised because it's only mRNA. Depends on the particular type of vaccine. So we have to look when the vaccine introduces the vaccine, we should be careful which one we can be given, which one cannot be given.
Okay, sir. Any other queries?
Sir, there are two questions also. Do we need to vaccinate person who was infected earlier?
I think I explained that in detail.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I am antibody positive, and some of my colleagues are antibody negative. I prefer my antibody negative colleagues to be vaccinated first, and then I will receive my vaccine, because we have got shortage of vaccine. That's my main reason. My main reason is the logistical issues and the shortage of vaccine.
Okay. Then another question is a little bit about the type of vaccine and which one do you advise? In UK, mRNA-based vaccination has started, but they have also ordered 100 million Oxford vaccine. Dr. Arun is actually outside, abroad. That's his question.
See, in India, we are not going to get the Pfizer vaccine in the beginning. We are going to get the Oxford University adenoviral vector vaccine. We are ordered around 10 crores of the Oxford University vaccine. We are getting the Russian Sputnik vaccine. By that time, we will have the Bharat Biotech Covaxin and Zydus Cadilaz vaccine. The beginning, I don't think we are going to get the Pfizer vaccine, at least in the beginning, maybe later.
Okay.
There is another query. Do we have effectiveness and efficacy data for plasma therapy being useful?
There are plenty of publications supporting plasma therapy and opposing plasma therapy. The ICMR study did not find plasma therapy to be useful, but there are some methodological issues with the ICMR study that did not measure the neutralization titer. There are some good papers have proven that plasma therapy could be useful when given very, very early stage of the disease. So if a patient is coming within 4 days of the onset of symptoms and sudden deterioration, plasma therapy will work. So very early sudden deterioration, plasma therapy may work, but not later. And the plasma we give should have good neutralization titer.
Okay.
Any other queries?
Any more queries? Actually, there was a technical error last time. Last question, any questions?
No,
Any
your
more,
voice is breaking. I can't hear.
any more questions? Any questions you can put in chat box.
I can't hear. The voice is breaking.
Ma'am, you're
You are not audible. Am I audible? Sir, actually, am I audible, sir? Stuck ആയിരിക്കുകയാണ്. എന്റെ വീട്ടിൽ ചെയ്യുന്നത് നല്ലതെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു. Sir, am I audible?
yeah, you are audible, ma'am.
Audible now. Okay. No more questions now. Thank you, sir. You have answered each and every question. In many queries, many doubts, everything has been clear because already the Kerala government has collected the data of the health workers. So many were worried whether we are guinea pigs. Somebody asked. Actually, so there were so many queries among my colleagues when the data was collecting. So that's why we selected this topic today for discussion so that I can tell them some reply. Okay, very thank you.
It was, yeah, very energetic session, really.
Very energetic. You are very much you are enlightened us with all the nuts and bolts of the current scenario of the vaccine, and a very big thanks from the Deshinganadi team. Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.